Okay, folks, I want to show you something about how glue squeeze out can be a real problem when you're using stain. The kind of stain that I'm using is this Minwax wood finish. And normally when I build cabinets, I make sure to sand everything, even after it's been glued up and there's any glue squeeze out. I'll run the sander down every corner of the inside of that cabinet and make sure that there is no glue whatsoever that'll mess up the stain. In this particular case, I did that several months ago as I was building this Murphy book door case, hidden door system, and it was time to put on the oak molding, the fluting, and all the olding, the baseboard and the stiles and all that kind of stuff to as a finishing touch of the Murphy bookcase. And so we needed to stain the oak. We also needed to stain the shelves and all the insides and all that stuff. So I needed to leave the very next day. So I kind of got in a hurry, and so as I was putting on the oak piece. Now this is a piece of oak that's the front edge of the plywood. And I've already taken care of, I had already taken care of handling all the shells so that there would not be any glue squeeze out on that. But what I failed to do is when I put on the flutes and the stiles and so forth, for that I had glued it up, and I actually used a pin nailer to nail, a brad nailer I should say, brad nailer to nail these things into the cabinet properly. I had to make sure they were all measured just right, because this is the pieces that actually fold together that hide that door and need to be really accurate. So I was in a kind of a rush I was rushed trying to put it together, because I put glue on the backs of the pieces and then glued them into the carcass and then nailed them down, holding them precisely in place. And one of the problems I had was I forgot to bring clamps that would allow me to clamp it together, and so there was a gap between the wood or the oak wood molding and the cabinet, the raw faces of the cabinet and so forth that I was gluing to, and so I had to figure out a way to squeeze that together. I did come up with a way to do it. I only had one clamp that would work, and it was a C clamp, and I used that. I had to screw it down one place, pull it down, screw it down again, get it all together, and there was glue squeeze out in there, but I was in such a rush at that point that I just wiped down I took a shop towel and wiped off the glue, not thinking that I'm pressing the glue down into the plywood and that it would mess up the stain. So I forgot completely about sanding that glue squeeze out off of the plywood. This plywood is fairly cheap plywood, and so the outside veneer is quite thin, and it's quite easy to sand through it. So I have to be careful doing that anyway. But what I've done is this is a part of the shelf that I didn't need, so it's cut off. But I used it to put some glue on here. So I'm doing an experiment. I put some glue as squeeze out here and here, and I wanted to see what would happen if I scraped that glue off and then stained it. Actually, I'm going to stain it first, and you'll see the effects of it, where this is the wrong color where the glue is, and the rest of it is nicely stained. And I'll be using this particular finish. But the experiment is, can I use a scraper, paint scraper, to scrape that glue off after I've stained it, and then reapply stain and have it all blend together just like it's supposed to. That's the situation I'm in right now. I've got to go back to Atlanta, my daughter's house, and apply this, but I'm testing this here in my shop at home to see. So this is just a mock-up test of what happens when you get glue squeeze out, apply a stain, and now you've got to fix the problem. And I'm going to do it with a scraper. Normally I would do it with a cabinet scraper like this, where you use the cabinet scraper and you just you scrape thin pieces off. But this is actually going to be the places where I'm doing this is an inside panel wall like this in the cabinet, and I've got to scrape it like this. And this piece is part of the stile, and it sticks out a little bit further. So there's a little bit of a overlap of the stile and the inside of there. So this would have to be done right on that inside edge. And so I'm going to try something, a paint scraper here. This is a very sharp piece of carbide, and I can rub that up against the edge of that part right there and pull this down and scrape the wood and scrape the glue along with it, and then reapply the stain. So this is a test to find out whether that's going to work. But I thought you might learn a few things or two in the process. So let me get my table set up with cardboard so I can stain this thing and all that, and then we'll just continue on. Okay, folks, let me get this staining done. I'm going to put my gloves on and nitrile gloves. I want to stain the wood, not my hands. Although I must admit I've forgotten to put them on before. I really only need it on this hand, but I'm going to go ahead and put it on both just in case I mess up. And need to put it on there. These are these nitrile, I don't know how you say it. They're not latex gloves. They won't. They're more impervious to certain types of chemicals, including finishes and stuff like that. Yeah, so they're good for that. I need some stir sticks. All right, so I've got these tongue depressors that I'll use to stir up the finish with, and this doesn't have any solids on the bottom that I can feel, so I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. I've got this cardboard where I don't have to worry about spilling that out, but I'll pour just a little bit down inside the can, and what I'll do is I'll get one of these white cloth things here where I can clean that up and also clean up the bottom of the can so that it'll be ready to go again. And all right, so I've got my scraper, but I won't use that yet. What we're going to do to begin with is just put the stain on here, just to show you and demonstrate how badly the left on glue distorts the stain and makes it messed up when you're doing this. So I like to just wipe on my stain. I also like to use wipe on poly as part of the finish, either polyacrylic, the water based, or the polyurethane based. Wipe on means it's just diluted quite a bit more so you can wipe it on. You don't have to use a brush or anything like that. You can just use a rag like what I'm about to use right now. So I folded it and I got that piece right there, which is my pad, and that'll allow me to put stain on there. Now once the stain's on here, I'll need to wait 2 hours for it to dry. That's what it says on the can anyway. It's also, if you're going to put a finish coat on it, like the polyurethane or whatever, you need to wait 4 hours. So 2 hours to dry so that you can do something else with it and so forth. And then 4 hours before you can put stain on it after that. So we're going to just wait 2 hours after I put this on here to start testing whether we can get rid of this stain and this glue. So I'm just using this little plastic cup right here to put this stain on here. And so far so good. That looks nice. And they say you're supposed to wipe the excess stain off, but that's actually what I'm doing with this. So you're going to start seeing the problems with this glue right now as I put this on here. So can you see this glue from here to here? That's preventing the stain from soaking through into the wood. The glue acts as a protective coat that keeps the glue from the stain from getting into the wood, and so it becomes a real problem, and it's a eyesore once you've done it. So I love these white rags because they're actually paper, but they act just like rags, and they're throwaway because they are paper. But they don't tear up, and they don't have any lint that gets caught up on the board and things like that. So there are a number of different problems that you can see with this shelf right here. This is the way it should look. All in here is the way it should look. This is bad wrong. That's bad wrong. That's just basically glue. And so I'm going to be using a scraper to try to scrape down this glue and get that glue off here, get it back down to the raw wood. And I'm using a scraper because I don't want to use a sander that might cut through the veneer. I want to be able to scrape off thin pieces and just the glue in there. The problem is once you wipe it off with a paper towel or whatever, you're actually pressing the glue down into the grain. So I've actually had to go a little deeper probably to get it in there, but we'll see how it goes. This is an experiment. But so now we're going to wait 2 hours so that we can fix this major problem that has occurred. And if this works, then I'll publish the video and I'll go ahead and drive back to Atlanta and finish up and fix the inside of the cabinet where I put on the stiles and the rails. I mean the mullions and the fluting and all that kind of stuff, and I put it on there too fast and forgot to sand the squeeze out off. And lessons learned. You got to be careful and just remember all the steps you need to take to get this stuff done. But normally when I work on small projects here in the shop, I'm not using stain. I'm either using a clear finish shellac, which even this messes up the shellac because the shellac does darken the wood just slightly. But no matter what you do, you should really be working diligently to get the glue off. But such as it is, I'll see you once this thing is dried for a couple of hours. It's 1:30 now. Later on, I may have to do some other things today, so it may be tomorrow morning before I finish this up. But regardless, you'll see me again almost in a few seconds, but it'll be hours from now. Okay, folks, it's been a couple of hours since I put this stain on here, and it's dried now. And so I'm going to use this scraper. This scraper has a carbide tip blade on it. The bevel goes down this direction. The flat is on this direction. So when I hold it at this angle, it's going to dig into the wood a little bit. It's carbide, so it's very hard. You can't sharpen it with a file or anything like that. You just have to buy a new one. I mean, if you had a diamond stone, you could sharpen it. But what I did do is take a grinder and I grind a slight little bevel off each corner so that it's not going to make a mark gouging into the wood or anything like that. But I don't know whether I've never used one of these tools before, so I'm doing this for the first time. This one I'm going to do from this side like this. Over here on this side, I'm going to go ahead and use this scraper blade, and I can feel it's got a sharp burr on the front side of this thing, and I'm going to use this on this side, and that way I'll have information on which technique is better to do. I'm afraid this one may be a little bit too aggressive, but I'm not sure of that. So let me stand up, and so you'll be able to see me doing this. I did run this a little bit past it. That when I saw that sharp edge right there, that's when I decided to do the thing before it ever dried. So I did that before couple of hours ago. So I'm going to grab, I'm going to pull it down like this. All right, so that pulls, I don't know what it's doing to the glue. I've got this board held down by these Festool holders like this. It's making little shavings like this, and that's part of that's got to be the glue. I went lightly down this side because I want it to be flush over there. It feels kind of rough right here, and it's not rough at all right here. So I'm going to sand, get it clean, and I'm going to just do a little bit of light sanding here. I don't even know which grit this is. This is 150 grit. So, but it's been used a bunch, so it's probably more like a 220 or something like that. Now, I have no idea. I'm probably going to test this a little bit to see whether this is actually doing the job right here. This looks clean, but it may be clean only because it never really had any stain in there, and I have scraped off the glue. So this is a lot of stuff that I've scraped off of there. And let's see. I need the stain. You know what? I can't put the stain on there until I put the cardboard back on here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try both techniques right here. This is a card scraper. It's sharpened. It's got the burr on only one side, so it's not much of one on this side, but it is definitely a burr on this side where the little emblem is, and this side I can tell there's no burr whatsoever. So there's only one burr, and so what you do is you bend it kind of like that, and then as you're pushing it, you're holding it over like this, and that burr is going to catch the wood just like a plane would, and it's going to take up, but there won't be any tear out. So this is, and by curving it like that, you're lifting up off the wood on the two sides that it's going next to. That way, it can blend in with the next. All right, so there's some stuff right there. And probably a lot of that's glue, because if it's wood, it would be more like shavings. And this will actually be much smoother than the scraper was over here, because it's working like a plane with the shavings. That's kind of sticky. I don't know how well it's done. There's some glue spots right here, so I'm going to work on those two spots right now. Okay, so I think I'm going to pause this and then take this up and bring the cardboard back so I can stain them and see how that goes. If it's not enough, I may have to do it some more. But let me get these things out of the way, the tools. So here comes a pause. Okay, I've got my cardboard to protect the bench here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to blend the stain in and not add any more stain to the parts that are already stained. So that's just a matter of wiping and so forth. Get my stain out right here. Get the thing to open it with. Okay, now the stain is opened. I'll stir it up a little bit. And get my one nitrile glove on. Well, maybe I put two, I don't know. You have to find a thumb on these things. The short one is the thumb. So there's the thumb right there. And then you got to aim your fingers for the rest of the long ones over there. And then put it on like that. So I'm going to need another white rag that I fold up like this. So I fold it in half, fold it 2 times, fold it 3 times, and then 4 times. So that makes a nice little pad for putting this stain on here. And I'm pour a little bit in there, and I'll get the top and just kind of prop it on there. I'm going to kind of press the stain out of there because, all right, now I'm going to do the middle section here first. I'm rubbing it on very slightly. And it is darkening the places that I've already done, but it did get the glue up. So that's the good news. And the good news here is the stain is sinking in where the glue was just fine. But blending it in is the problem. It's not easily done. Okay, so the glue looks like it did pretty good right there. I do have a problem right here where the scraper went through the veneer and is showing the veneer skin underneath that. That's what those marks are there, because it's actually smooth. So it means that I have broken through the veneer there. Now this is a piece of shelf that I wasn't going to use anyway. So let's see what it does right here. Looks like it's doing the same thing. No, it's still got glue underneath there. All right, it's holding up. It did fine where the big scraper was used, but where I used the cabinet scraper, it wasn't enough. So I'm going to see I'm not holding it. I mean, I'm holding it with one hand and scraping with the other, so I'm really not getting the proper technique on this thing. Now, supposedly, that's all partial wood, partial glue, and we'll see if, yep, that made it through the glue. But there's a spot here and a spot here where the glue is still holding it back. That looks okay there. All right, so now I need to continue my work on those spots. All right, so This is basically a fix-it job. I'm trying to stay inside that circle there. Darken it up everywhere it seems to be a little bit too light. Not touching the dark parts as heavily. And then I've got this little line right here I need to kind of darken up. Now, I said earlier on that this was cheap plywood, which explains why the veneer is so thin. But it's also expensive plywood because all plywood is outrageously expensive. This was like almost $70 for a sheet of plywood, which used to cost about $50 before all this inflation started hitting us here. Okay, so that's kind of splotchy. The only good thing I can say about it is, I mean, I really can't sand everything down inside there because everything's already installed, but I can, you know, fix it like this. This is a lot better than it was. It needs to dry, so it's a lot better than it was. And when it's installed and books are in the side right there, it's not going to show up nearly as bad as it looks right now. But and the other side of this plywood is just terrible. You can see it's got knots in there and wood filler down in here. They just did a poor job of putting this together. It's called sandy plywood, and I'm not sure why they call it sandy. S-A-N-D-E, and it's from Brazil, or one of those South American countries, and they manufacture it down there and ship it up here and sell it to Lowe's and Home Depot and all that kind of stuff. But the plies are rather thick. They're not all the same kind of wood, I don't think. But theoretically, sandy is a hardwood plywood. But enough about the cheap plywood and everything. It is what it is, and it's what I used. I tried to get Baltic birch black plywood, but it's just not available. Particularly since most of that is produced and sold in the Ukraine, and they're at war. You can't get anything out of there. So anyway, that's the Baltics, and so where that plywood comes from. But anyway, I'm going to let this dry again. I may come back and do another little recap after it's dried for another couple of hours, and let you know my final conclusions on this. Really, the biggest conclusion is that I think this scraper blade does a better job. The wood was much smoother. I didn't have to sand it like I did this side over here. I don't know if the scraper is responsible for these mad marks down here, but it did break through the veneer into the next layer down in those spots. It did not broke through, but it got down to the where it comes through, where the next layer shows up down here, because those layers of veneer are so thin. The outside layer is. All right, folks, I'll see you. I'll do another recording and wrap it up. Okay, folks, it's the next day, but 30 minutes after I shut down the last video that I did where I was showing you the results of this. I decided to see if I couldn't blend in the dark spots with the not so dark spots. Or basically I wanted to remove some of the dark spots where I was putting stain on a new spot, but obviously I was overlapping a little bit with the dark spot or the existing spot, which made it darker. And so what I did was I got some mineral spirits. This is 30 minutes, so it hadn't dried for 2 hours, so it was just 30 minutes afterwards. I took some mineral spirits and I wet this cloth right here, and then you can see that I got off quite a bit of dark stuff, and I was just rubbing in the dark areas. I wasn't trying to touch the lighter spots. So it ended up being a little bit better. I mean, this piece of plywood is still terrible looking, but it's going to be covered up with books and everything, and this is actually not part of the existing shells. This was a cut off, but this, anyway, what's happened is that the test has been successful. I can fix it. I can use, and I use this scraper right here to begin with, and that's a little bit too rough. I don't really like using this scraper. Maybe I could try it again and be a little bit more gentle with it, but this scraper seems to work really well, putting that burr on the edge and then just scraping off that, and it doesn't seem to do as much damage. That's what I did down here. I used this scraper up here and this scraper down here, and it seemed to work better, and it did take all the glue off. A couple of spots I had to rework because it didn't quite go through, but the scraper is the tool to do this with, and you need to know how to sharpen one of these things. Basically, it's just a piece of steel, fairly thin steel, and you want to flatten, you want to polish one edge, polish another edge, polish this tiny edge right here, so that you have a perfectly square finish with sharp edges on the corners. And then you take a burnishing tool and you draw the edge out, so it's bending the steel and making a little thin burr on the outside, and then you roll it over, and basically that's what this burr, you can feel hear my fingernail popping on the edge of that burr, and that burr ends up becoming like a little plane iron, and it takes the wood off, and you bend it just slightly, and so these sharp corners won't dig into the wood, so you can bend and get just along this center edge and roll up a shaving. I mean, it's not dust you're making. You're making shavings just like you would with a hand plane, and but they're tiny little shavings, and it's actually much smoother than sandpaper than what you can do with sandpaper. So cabinet scrapers are a good thing. I should use one more often. I do use sanders quite a bit, but this is a great tool to have in your toolbox. Not just when you need to fix something, but when you need a good smooth edge, particularly on gnarly grain that moves directions a lot, and when you have a lot of figure in the wood, like a piece of maple that has figure and little things that you can see. That's because the grain is going different directions, and if you're planing against the grain where the grain is sticking up like this, and you plane against it, it's going to grab those grains and pull them up and cause tear out. So you want your grain to be going this way, and your plane coming over the top of that, and it's much smoother. So if it's going both ways, you'll have smooth parts, and then you'll have rough parts. And you can, on a hand plane, you can adjust the throat down so it's just very, very close, so it reduces the amount of tear out that you can get. But this is the key right here, because it's impossible to have tear out with this thing, because it's such a tiny little blade, and it's immediately curling it up all within a few thousandths of an inch. as it slices a tiny little piece of wood off of there. And that's it. So folks, thanks for watching, and I'll be presenting a video that's the final on the bookcase eventually. But these are just little tidbits that I've run into along the way I thought you might find interesting, particularly when it was a mistake, because we all make mistakes occasionally, and sometimes they're expensive mistakes. And so this would have been a disaster had I left it like this. But I'll be going to Atlanta now and repairing the cabinets that had the glue squeeze out. And I remember the cabinet itself, when I glued them up, carcasses, I got rid of all the glue squeeze out then, because I had plenty of time and I was working on it and really thinking through exactly all the steps I needed to do. I knew I needed to get rid of the glue squeeze out. But that last day before I had to come back, when I was putting on all the oak molding, I put too much glue on the oak, and I put glue in both places because I really like, whenever I put glue on wood and glue two things together, I like to wet them both with glue. So I had way too much glue. So there was a lot of squeeze out, but I was panicking because I didn't have enough clamps, and I didn't get the wood tight enough up against the frame, the oak wood pieces, and I had to squeeze them down with the clamp and nail it with a nail gun to get it close. And it was just a stressful time, and I didn't think about doing the repairing the glue squeeze out that came out. I did wipe it down, but then now it's invisible, so it didn't come back to mind when I got ready to do the stain a day or so later. So talk to you later.